Hello and welcome to today's episode of Owning Your Menopause. I'm really excited for today's guest. I know I say that about a lot of my guests, but I think this one is going to strike a chord with so many of you. So today I have, I'm not even going to say her name yet, a burnout prevention strategist and coach. Who has had a successful 15-year leadership career. Yet she was burned out, exhausted, and missing out on life with her family. You've gone from living and leading from her core to trying to fit in order to change a toxic corporate culture. What you came to realise was after burnout that there is, sorry, Kate, I'm going to edit that bit. What you came to realise after your burnout is that the way we are working isn't working. How we are taught to define success and climb the ladder is outdated, yet it doesn't have to be this way. When we live and lead from our core, we can enjoy being successful on our own terms and in our own way. You are an executive coach, psychologist and burnout expert who lives in Cambridge with your partner, twin sons, 2 bonus sons, and her rescue dog. You began your leadership career in 1998 and went on to have a successful career in HR, where you believed in a people-first approach. You created the world's first mental well-being for HR program, banned annual performance reviews in 2008, and your talk on burning the handbook has been called the best thing to come out of HR since the Netflix culture deck. You founded the award-winning consultancy, The Chrysalis Crew, and in 2021, you founded Kelly Swingler Limited, where you now focus on helping ambitious and exhausted women leaders make a bigger impact without burnout and guilt. So Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. I sound pretty good on paper, don't I?
No, I've seen you in real life and you are just as dynamic as real life as you are on paper.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, I'm really, I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. So, yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, so we met, didn't we? I had the privilege of listening to you talk at Dame Kelly's Athena event
Yes.
earlier
Yeah.
on this year, and I felt like your chat was one of the ones that really hit a chord with so many women. But I think we're going to come on to that. If we can just
hmm
maybe start and let people understand, Kelly, and for you to share your personal burnout story.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this one till Christmas, so you'll just have to shut me up. But yeah, and I suppose like many of us, right? I didn't necessarily realise at the time that I was a high achiever or an overperformer, but I think looking back on it, I kind of always was. Like all the way through school, I was just kind of top sets. Lots of things just kind of came really naturally. I remember kind of being like the fastest in my primary school, right? And then kind of being told that all the boys were just letting me win because that was a nice thing for them to do. And I look back on it now and I think, no, you weren't at all. But I had, I'd always been a kind of high performer, high achiever. Lots of stuff had just come really naturally. I started a management training program in '98, and again, lots of things I could just do. Not to say that everything was easy, but there were lots of things that I think with just some common sense and focusing on people, I was just really easily able to do it. And I then felt unexpectedly pregnant with my twin sons when I was 20. Well, I was 19. I had them 3 months after my 20th birthday. By age 30, I had my seat at the table. I was 30 years old. I had my seat. Organisation of 4,000 people, leading a team of 43. Sat at that board level. I'd been headhunted into that position. And I think at first, I think there were lots of things, right? It was the largest organisation, or one of the largest that I'd been an HRD at. I'd worked in kind of global and multinational companies up until that point, but not having that seat at the table. And I think some of it, I just thought, this is what it feels like to work at this level, right? Clearly, they were paying me the big bucks because this is what we're supposed to be experiencing, right? This is what we're supposed to be feeling. This is the stress that we're supposed to be experiencing. This is the life that we're supposed to be sacrificing. Everything should be about work. And in January 2013, I was 32 years old. I had gone into this role. The toxicity had been growing. My gut feel had been telling me to get out. But again, I think for many of us, when we're in those positions, we genuinely think that we can be the people that turn it around. And that's what I kept believing, right? I can be the one to turn it around. I'm here because I can turn it around. I'm here because I can make all of this stuff happen. And in the January of 2013, I started to experience the worst pain that I have ever experienced in my entire life. 3 days later, I couldn't really stand up. I'd passed out on the train on the way home. So I was commuting to and from London every day. I'd passed out on the train on the way home, managed to get off the train at my station. And I just say, thankfully, a friend of mine had been on the same train a few carriages back and literally caught me before I collapsed on the platform. Her and her husband took me straight to A&E. And I remember sitting in A&E, being prodded and poked and all of this pain, and being told immediately, we're going to get a gynecologist to come and see you. I lay on this bed, and then shift change came, and I was told, you don't need to speak to a specialist. We're just going to give you, we think you've probably got a bit of a water infection. Here's some pills, off you go. And that was the first hospital admittance for 7 months. And I was being literally rushed into hospital at least on a monthly basis, sometimes more, because of this pain that I was experiencing. But I never ever took a day off. There was no part of my brain, no part of my body that told me that I should stop working. And so on the days that I couldn't commute into London, I was either working from home or working from my hospital bed. I had 2 operations in 48 hours in the July for 2 now quite serious health conditions that I live with. I now live with 3 chronic health conditions as a result of the stress and strain that I was putting my body under. But I had these 2 operations in 48 hours, and it was only after those operations that I actually took some time off. And back in 2013, you can't do it now. It's probably for very, very good reason. But back in 2013, you could literally watch daytime chat shows from kind of 6 o'clock in the morning until probably 6 o'clock in the morning. You could watch like Maury Povich, and you could watch Ricky Lake, and you could watch Oprah. Like, you could watch all of them. And I think I'd had this mind-numbing day of kind of back-to-back chat shows, and my sons had come home from school. They were 12 at the time. And I think I just must have looked awful, which I blame the chat shows for. But, my sons had kind of come home from school, and my first instinct was to say to my 12-year-old sons, don't worry, mum's going to be fine. I'm going to be back at work soon, and everything is going to be okay. And my sons came and sat on this coffee table where I was kind of laying in front of the sofa, took one look at each other, and one of them said to me, but we don't want you to go back to work, mum, because we think your job is killing you. And when you've been through 7 months of excruciating pain to the point that you cannot stand up, you can't move, you can't function, but you still think, I can still type on my laptop so I can still work, and your 12-year-old sons look at you and are like, your job's killing you, mum. That was the most painful, kind of gut-wrenching moment of that entire 7 months. And I realised that, yes, something did need to change. And I think like things just started changing within my mind, right? I realised that I had been losing a lot of myself, sacrificing too much of myself for this toxic organisation. I had been compromising my own values, my own morals, my own ethics to try and create this change. And I had also lost a lot of my personality, right? I'd been told for years, right, if you want to make it to the top, we need you in black suits, we need you with this. I'd lost all of my kind of colour personality. I know I'm in, kind of a fairly kind of dull colour set, but usually like, big personality, big colour, big, like everything was big, right? Big jewellery, big everything. And little by little, I'd been told for years, we love it, but we want a bit less. And every time I had been told to shrink just that little bit, I allowed myself to do it because, again, I thought that's what I needed to sacrifice, or not even necessarily sacrifice, right? But that was just what happens to get you to the top, right? Clearly, there is this ideal leadership way of being, and all these people were seemingly successful leaders. So I needed to listen. And so I went back to work. We took a two-week family holiday to Greece, gorgeous holiday. And I came back and just thought, that's it. I cut all my hair off, dyed it bleach blonde. It's natural now, but dyed it bleach blonde. Got back into my kind of funky style of dressing, and I went back to work. And first day, I was like, I do not belong here, right? I just do not belong. Started to look for some different jobs. They all seemed pretty much the same. And that's when I heard myself say for the first time I was going to start my own organisation. So I did. And I started this award-winning consultancy. We're winning awards left, right and centre, working with clients all over the world, growing a team massively. But then I received 2 phone calls in 48 hours that literally turned my whole life upside down and completely changed the trajectory of my career. And the first was to tell me that my replacement had died in her room on her own whilst away on a leadership residential. And the second came 2 days later, where I was told that I had not been the first HRD to become seriously ill in that organisation, but I'd actually become the fourth. And I think for lots of us, if we work in corporates, right, or if we work in any organisation, if we leave under an agreement or a payoff, or we, kind of a mutual way, this thing happens where we never get spoken about again. And I call this the kind of Harry Potter syndrome, right? It's a bit like Voldemort, right? We must never mention your name once you've left the organisation. And I knew there'd been quite a big turnover, but I maybe just assumed it was because they were, these other HRDs maybe just hadn't been that good, or they couldn't put up with the stress, or, they weren't resilient enough, or all of these things. And to receive that phone call to tell me that all of them had become seriously ill was like we've got to do better. And so initially everything that I was doing was we've got to get better for HR. And so I started training and studying and learning. I wanted to understand about this thing called burnout and stress and why we stay in toxic workplaces. And I was studying things like psychology. I'd already done my kind of psychology and exec coaching degree in addition to a number of, kind of training and other qualifications. But I then kind of started to really look into kind of psychotherapy and hypnotherapy and yoga and meditation, and understand our energy body and the vagus nerve and central nervous system, and why were we staying in these sorts of organizations. And that's when I kind of went on to create this kind of first world's mental health program for HR. But in doing all of that, I'd learned all of the theory.
Yeah.
But I'd not made any of the changes. And so when I burnt out again in 2015, the first burnout made me really seriously ill, but the second nearly killed me because I hadn't really changed anything. I was still working at the same pace. I was still thinking that success meant working hard. I still felt, that it was kind of sleep when you're dead. We've got plenty of time to kind of do all this stuff later, and didn't make any of the changes. And it wasn't until 2015 that I really, really started to live it and breathe it, and then kind of start to make the differences. So I stayed in my consultancy, I suppose, almost kind of doing this burnout on the side. And then when we got to 2020, and I was able to have, we didn't get lots of it, but I had 2 months where we had no, some of the client work had been postponed or kind of put on hold, but I literally had 2 months of just kind of downtime. And it was during that downtime, I think, that I realized, this is what I'm here to do. This is exactly what I'm meant to be doing. And so although I was doing it as kind of a bit of a sideline, it's been full-time ever since. And I know that I am here now. I know that I went through 2 periods of burnout so that nobody else has to. And it's this now that kind of gets me out of bed every day.
I mean, do you know what? That is it's really hard, because I think sadly that so many women, so many people find themselves a new career or a new path due to an experience like you had. And I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that in order to help other women. I've got a couple of questions. I always deviate from what I've set myself to ask. Just kind of from what you said, like in the role that you were in and in the job that you were doing. I know you said that obviously previous employees had also not had a great experience.
Yeah.
Was everyone else around you working like that? Like was that the expectation? And then the other thing was did you enjoy it? Because you're a very driven person. I can see that you're very motivated, that you just give it all. And I'm not saying that that's the sort of person that would have burnout, but I think that there are people that will just turn up, they do their role, they set their boundaries, and off they trot. Whereas there are those that are like, you know what, no, I want to do it. But I therefore think if you're enjoying it, and you'll be better placed to answer this, that stress element isn't really necessarily, sometimes the stress isn't the work, it can be out of work. It's that work-life balance, and then where's that stress coming in? So I guess, was everyone else in the company working like that? And actually, did you enjoy the job?
So I absolutely loved the job. And I genuinely think at the point that I started to think I cannot stay in this organisation, I think if I had seen anything any differently in any of the job descriptions that made me think this is a really amazing, motivated, ready organisation that's kind of ready for change and ready to be doing so many things differently. Again, I was headhunted, and you mentioned in the introduction, I was headhunted because I was doing things differently. Like I scrapped performance appraisals 2008, 2010 kind of started this kind of burning the handbook. That was the whole thing. It was about creating people first workplaces. And I was told that's why I was headhunted, but actually this organisation wasn't ready for any of that. They didn't want any of that. And the more that I was looking at other jobs, it kind of, well, they don't really want it either. But I think if I could have found, at the point that I started looking, a dynamic organisation that would have welcomed what I was doing, I would have stayed in it. You know, I genuinely thought I was a corporate lifer. The first time I heard myself say, I'm going to go out on my own, I was like, no, because I like genuinely thought I was a corporate lifer, right? I was just going to keep climbing the ladder, going into bigger and bigger organisations, making a bigger difference, making a bigger impact. That's genuinely what I thought I was going to do. So I think the shock came to me of, you are now going to start your own business. And it was like, no, like that genuinely didn't feel like it was me. And I'm what now, 11, 12 years later. And I'm like, oh, I'm loving it. And now I know I'm completely unemployable. So I did, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I loved it from kind of day one that I got into the sector. Like everything about it was just people and common sense. And yes, I did some amazing stuff, but I did it all through my teams, through people, working with and building relationships with managers. And ultimately that was the thing that kind of made me tick. In that organisation were other people working at that level? No, absolutely not. And in some ways, I think that's what made me push even harder. And again, this is really common for lots of us when we are close to burnout. We can become really cynical, and we can start to look at other people as lazy and not engaged and not doing what they need to do. But I also think there had been part of me. I was the only woman at the level that I was working at. I was the only one with young children. I was the only one commuting as far as I was commuting. And I do think, and again, I've had to really think back on this one. I was never told that I wasn't enough because I was the only woman, and I was the only woman on many, many occasions. I was never told that I wasn't good enough because I had young kids. I was never told that I was not good enough because of anything that I was doing. But I think there was something in me that felt like I had to be the one to prove. And actually, because I knew that this organisation was as toxic and broken as it was, even when I joined, right? Ultimately, that's what I was recruited to turn around. And so I think I saw other people not working as hard as I was, and other people not caring as much as I was, and think, well, this is why the organisation's in the state that it's in then, right? If they put a bit more effort in, if they were a bit more engaged, if they did care a bit more, we wouldn't be working in this toxic workplace. But actually the toxicity wasn't coming necessarily from the hours that were being worked. And, you know, and to your point, really, we can love what we do. Burnout isn't just about the working hours, and it's not just about the stress. I know now there is one type of burnout. It's called a number of different things, but I think it was coined brilliantly in some research a couple of years ago. I think it was King's College London and an organisation called Softer Success, and they called it kind of moral injury. And actually what we mean by that is when we're working in or when there's working patterns or working behaviours, or we're working in places that are misaligned from our own values and morals and ethics. And that's what makes us push harder. And again, I think I use 2020 as a perfect example of this. I think if we look at 2020 and what was going on with the healthcare sector, what was going on with NHS, what teachers were having to kind of deal with, those three sectors, burnout has grown like exponentially since 2020. And again, I think a lot of it is because of this moral injury, because we see, you know, budget cuts, we see not the right amount of training, not the right amount of leadership. We had that whole PPE thing that was going on with kind of NHS and healthcare in 2020, whilst seemingly, you know, millionaires are, you know, kind of riding off the profits of stuff that they haven't provided. That was at odds with people's morals and ethics. That was totally against their values and their ways of working. And so I think when we see that, when we see broken systems, when we see broken ways of working, and we can kind of look at it and think, well, if they just did that, right, if we just used a bit of common sense and did that instead of that, then the issue would be fixed. So we keep working almost with this belief that people are going to use that bit of common sense and it's all just going to change, right? We keep going with the belief that it will get better. Yeah. We keep going because we think it's going to change. And again, you know, my body has gone through, like I said, I live with, you know, kind of three chronic health conditions now. So I suppose my my stress baseline now is a lot lower. I have much lower tolerance for all stress, full stop, because my body is just not able to cope with it. But at no point, and some of it was again because I know that my brain and my body were just trying to kind of keep me safe. But at no point, if you'd have said to me throughout 2012, 2013, 2011, 2010, if you'd have said to me, Kelly, are you experiencing like chronic stress? Do you feel that you're at the point of stress? Do you feel that you're at the point of breaking? I'd have said no, because I genuinely didn't feel that way. I loved what I was doing. I loved being able to make a difference. I loved being able to put all of that into people. And I do think what definitely contributed to that point of burnout was that moral injury. And because I was in that toxic workplace, a lot of the leaders just didn't care. They didn't want to make a difference. They were just showing up, getting paid the big money, and then going home at the end of the day.
Yeah, I do know it's funny, not funny like haha, but it's funny that because it sort of brings me on to like a little bit further conversation. If we've got time, I want to come back. We might have to do this all again. I've got so many questions for you. But when I think what happens for a lot of women, and obviously, being in that menopause space, is there are a lot of common signs for burnout that women might just mistake as menopause or menopause symptoms that does seem to take the blame for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And also, to your point about the kind of the 2020 and the COVID, I think, certainly from my own experience, is that, working from home, homeschooling, cooking meals, we locked ourselves away, we juggled, we did everything. We've left lockdown and we haven't removed the pressure that was on us. And so now I feel that never more does the midlife women in particular, that's obviously that's what I'm aiming at, deal with so much. And so I think we're finding it really hard to backtrack and shed some of that responsibility, not even shed but share. We're often the main caregivers. So I mean, what would you say to that? Menopause, burnout, like how do we distinguish this? Because we also know that when we come, into menopause and we are having these hormonal changes, we are less able to cope. And so I think a lot of people, again, just go, well, it's just menopause. I can't cope because that's what I've been told is going to happen. And then like you've said, your story, you pushed and you pushed and you pushed until your body literally said, will you just fucking stop? Talk me through that a bit.
Oh, I mean, this is probably a whole other episode on its own, Kate, really. But I think what we definitely need to see, and I talk to a lot of leaders about this on a daily basis. For a lot of us, we have to take that collective breath, right? We have to take that collective pause. We have, I think, all been kind of told, taught, conditioned now to believe that what we're experiencing is normal. Because we're all feeling it, right? Well, we're all feeling a bit fatigued. We're all tired. We're all struggling with menopause, or we're all struggling with menstrual cycles, or we're all struggling with no sleep, or we're all struggling with autoimmune conditions, or we're all struggling with low energy or low mood. And I think because I think some of it, because more of us are talking about it, more of us are, I definitely, in and around my first burnout, one of the conditions that I had so I had huge, although I struggled my entire life with my cycles, I had to have an ablation in 2013 because of a huge, ridiculously debilitating kind of flare up of endometriosis. And I was told that would stop my cycle probably for kind of 5 years. And I didn't have another period again until last October. So I'd basically had 11 years of no period. And I can remember probably when I was coming out of my second burnout, 2015 and into 2016, if you went into a doctor's surgery and there was posters on the wall, right, these are the symptoms of menopause, I could have ticked every single one of those off. But I was told by doctor, you're too young, right? Too young, don't worry about it. Years later, I ended up paying thousands of pounds out of my own pocket to go for blood tests and hormone checks. And did I have intolerances? Did I have allergies? Right? What was wrong with me? Because everything that I was being told wasn't adding up. I was told you're too young for anything else. And I genuinely think it was the Davina documentary. And a couple of friends of mine put me, said you need to go and speak to, Newson Health and contact Newson Health. I was straight on HRT from that first appointment, and within 6 weeks, I felt like a completely different person. Literally, my life was absolutely changed. And I don't think I'd have been here if I hadn't have had that, because I did start to think, even having gone through these 2 periods of burnout, I started to think that I must now be at the point of like crazy, right? I couldn't cope, I couldn't deal with anything, couldn't drive without like literally a panic attack, and that wasn't me either. So what was all of this stuff that I was going through? Since October last year, I'm now, and I'm complaining and doing all sorts of stuff again. I've spent even more thousands of pounds to kind of try and be listened to. But I've started to have more issues. So my cycle started again since October. We're early April now. I've had 16 really, really heavy bleeds since October. I've had to have biopsies. I've had hysteroscopies. I've had scans. I've had MRI scans. I've had all sorts of stuff going on, and I'm still waiting for answers. I think for all of us, we all know what our normal is. I think this is what I come back to all of the time, right? Whether it's burnout, whether it's menopause related, and or something else. Because again, some of these early signs of burnout can be absolutely signs of early burnout. They could also be signs of autoimmune conditions. They could be signs that we need to be making some changes. They could be signs that we have been living in ways that are totally misaligned from our values, right? And this is the kind of wake up that we need. But you're normal. And I think it's a shame that so many of us have to literally push and fight in order to advocate to be heard. But for many of us, that's what we have to go through. And just because I think more of us are talking about burnout and exhaustion and fatigue, the fact that so many of us now, some of the conversations that I've been able to have with my friends about menopause and menopause symptoms and endometriosis and burnout and mental health, my mum would never have been able to have with her friends, and my nan definitely wouldn't have done. And I do think we're normalizing the conversations, but for some of us, I think it means that we're then kind of almost normalizing the symptoms. Yeah. And I think there's a post that I keep seeing kind of doing the rounds on Instagram, and I can't quite remember the words of it, but it's basically something like, I can't work out if I'm just like exhausted, menopausal, burnout, or just trying to survive 2025. And a lot, when every time I kind of see that post doing the rounds, there's hundreds, maybe thousands of women that yeah, that's me. And so because we see it on there, we think, well, everybody else is doing the same. So these thousands of women just think, well, yeah, it's life. And actually it's not. And you're normal. When you're not feeling you're normal. And I think, if it is speaking to doctors, it is maybe changing some of our lifestyle, maybe it is changing our job, maybe it is getting support with menopause specialists or burnout specialists or holistic ways of looking at it. Maybe it is medication or HRT, maybe it's changing diet or looking at sleep or looking at how we're working or all of those sorts of things. But it is not normal. It's not normal. It's become the norm, but it is not normal to be living exhausted, not being able to get out of bed in the morning, not being able to think or concentrate or have any kind of zest for life, right? That's not normal. And so I think if we get to that point, start to speak to experts, right? Because again, I've trained GPs and medical professionals in burnout, because it's just not what they do. Not every GP is going to be a menopause expert. Not every GP is going to be an autoimmune expert. And for some of us, yes, that means, we've got to look at 10,000 Google reports. We've got to do our own research. We've got to speak to experts. We've got to, whatever it might be. But if that's what we need to do to allow ourselves some change and some respite and some solutions, and then we start to create more change for some of the next generations to come, I just think that's where we're at. But I think I definitely look at, kind of my generation, my kind of age group. I think, this group of women where we are at the moment, for those of us that are kind of midlife and going through that, we are genuinely the change makers, right? We are the ones that are saying we're not putting up with this stuff anymore. We're the ones that are saying we want information, we want evidence, we want research, we want change. And I think we've seen that in kind of every generation previously. But I think when it comes to women's health and understanding all of this stuff, right, we're the ones making the difference. And yeah, I think we've genuinely just got to know what our own normal is. And if we don't feel that anymore, what do we need to change? But we have to stop believing that what we are experiencing is normal just because it's become the norm.
I've written so many notes based on what you've just said to sort of...
I can rant about this forever, Kate.
go and have lunch somewhere, or like maybe check into a hotel for a couple of nights and just chat this one
Yeah.
through. Because there is ending like, oh, there's the bucket, got to the bottom, oh, there's more filling up. So I've written here, I guess kind of like the boundaries thing and the children and all of that, because I think, I mean, but based on my own experience, which I'm always very happy to do, you know, when I have these conversations with my partner, I'm tired and I've done it. Like, I love my job. Like, every ounce of me bounces out of bed in the morning. I'm there, and you know, everyone will be testament to that. And then at the back end of the day, you're tired, and then I'll get the comment, well, don't do so much, you know, from my husband, which is lovely because it's supportive. And I think that's something where I explain, like, the bits that I don't want to do are the bits that I you know, it is the washing, it is the cooking, it is the cleaning, it is the taxi driver, it is the emotional person for everybody. And I've got 3
It's
kids.
the invisible housework, right? It literally is the invisible housework.
And that's the bit I think that pushed so many women over the edge.
Yeah.
Yet the problem is, and I think you've kind of picked up on this, it's that we've talked about the gender health gap, but this is where we kind of come into this workplace, is that, you know, we can't do it all. And yet we as women predominantly might have to take a back seat in our careers or in our work because we are still the caregivers. And that feels really unfair on so many levels, when actually, when you're in that state of kind of like, this is all too overwhelming, and it's not saying I don't enjoy being a parent, it's the biggest, most privileged thing I've ever been able to do, but it sometimes is very exhausting. And then the joy comes there, and then you feel guilty because the joy is coming from a place that's outside of where you're told by society you should be getting joy from. And it's like, it's just then a whole load of other, you know, emotions. So I guess kind of like, how do you, like, I'm totally fine with that because I sit with that, and I say very clearly when I'm asked that, or said don't do so much, I say it's not the job, like the job I love, and I love being parent, but it is, you know, I've got A levels and GCSEs going on at the moment, so I'm trying to do what I'm doing.
I know what that feels like.
Managing them, making sure they're working, making sure they're fed, making sure their mental health is okay, you know, then supper's on the table. So it's all of that. But how do you, and I want my kids to see that I enjoy my work, because I think probably if I was saying them I enjoy, they'd probably go, well, no, she's always stressed. And that's not my job that's stressing me out. So how do we take that back? Like, how do we as women go, okay, do you know what? How do we set those boundaries? How do we advocate for our own space? And how do you delegate? How do you ask for that help? Because I think that that's the one thing that stops so many women, is we're fearful of going, help.
Yeah, and I do think this is very kind of, I do think this very much depends on the household dynamics, the family dynamics. And I am going to say, right, the contracting that you have within your relationship and within your own home about how you're going to make that work. So I grew up in a household where actually my mum was the main breadwinner. My dad went out to work, my mum went out to work all the time. My dad stayed home and looked after us 3. You know, my dad was in the paper. I think it was 1991 as like housewife of the year, full page spread in the newspaper on International Women's Day, because somebody had picked up the fact that my mum had always worked. My dad had stayed at home to look after us 3. So my dad gave up his career. So my mum really focused on work and focused on earning, and my dad did very much of the household stuff. But, and my mum will talk about it very openly now, there was still almost the expectation, the kind of unwritten rule, that when my mum then came home from work, the house responsibility became hers, because my dad had been working all day looking after us. And I hadn't necessarily realised that was going on at the time. I knew my parents, you know, they're still together 40, however many years they've been married now. But they argued a lot when we were children. And now I know a lot of those arguments was because my dad was almost like, you know, I've cooked dinner's on the table, right? My job's done for today now, love. You're now home, you're now in mum role. So actually the baths, the bedtime stories, everything that needed doing in the evening is kind of now over to you. I've been working all day, you've not been here. Off you go. Now, I didn't know that was happening. When I then had my sons, my husband, my son's dad, my now ex-husband, But he was still very much kind of starting his career. I already kind of had, even at 20, I had a managerial kind of leadership role. I was earning more than double what he was at the time, and I was always the main breadwinner. Now, because I wasn't always working at home, he was the one doing the school run. He was the one sorting dinner. But again, it was almost like at weekends, he took weekends off, and I'd be the one doing the mopping and the hoovering and the tidying and the sorting and all of the invisible stuff, right? So the shopping, the making sure the kids had uniform that fit them, the birthday parties, the invitations, all of that. And he was like, well, I do the school run and dinner. I'm now, I'm going to watch football. I'm going to kind of do whatever. And for me, I think asking for more and saying what I needed more of in that relationship, because he was quite happy to take the money and know that I was paying for the holidays and all of his designer clothes and the cars and the house and all that, but actually didn't want to contribute any more to the household at a weekend. Now, we're in a very different place. But the relationship that I'm in now, and I've, you said kind of bonus sons. So there's now 4 sons living in this house, plus the dog. We're both running our own businesses. We are very much like, it is team effort in terms of what we do. And it's not even just, he has some jobs and I have some jobs. It is what needs doing today and which one of us is going to take parts of those jobs. What do we need to do at the weekend and which one of us are going to take those jobs? And that's everything from school runs to birthday parties to money to shopping to ironing, washing, gardening, and some of it we have previously, we kind of live in the middle of nowhere now, so we can't get it. Some of it in the past has been delegating it out, right? We've bought cleaners in, we have a gardener with where we are now, because that's one thing that now we don't have to do. We can't get a cleaner to come out as far as we are. So again, all of us in this house are responsible for keeping on top of the clean. Like, it's not all my responsibility. My sons, the 4 of them, will have different jobs. Some of them are responsible for putting the bins out on a Monday. Some of them are responsible for walking the dog. Some of them are responsible for emptying the rubbish. They have dishwasher jobs. They have, who's shopping, who's washing, who's cleaning bathrooms. It's not all me. And I'm not going to have it as all me. Yeah. And again, living with the health condition that I live with, I don't have the energy, mental, emotional, or physical, to do it anymore. And we all live under this house, and we therefore must all take some sort of responsibility. And we've got planners and notes and all sorts, right, all over the fridge that kind of says this is the stuff that needs doing. But again, I was finding if it wasn't being done, so again, I was the only one having to remind everybody to do it. Yeah. Right. And I'm like, hang on, this isn't fair either, right? There's the list. Why should I have to be the one that's like, has everybody ticked their stuff off? Has it's been, that shouldn't be falling on me.
By the time you've asked someone, by the time you've explained that,
I don't. You might as well do it yourself.
You may as well do it yourself. And I do want to caveat with, like, my husband is amazing. Like, he does empty the dishwasher.
Yeah.
He'll load up the washing machine, and things are done. So it's definitely. It's not 50, but he does the garden, and we do the gardener. Like you, we live in the middle of nowhere. So, I think I then get upset because actually his weekends are then spent gardening when we want to have that time together and as the family. So I think maybe it's just, maybe it's that thing that, I don't know, we're all doing more. Like, I think men and women, we're all just doing more. Yeah. And the more you do, the more there is. Maybe that's kind of the thing.
Totally.
I wonder, like, you can delegate and you can do this and you can do that. But I still think that when things are delegated, like, my kids will empty the dishwasher, I hope, by the time I go back inside from talking to you. Yeah. There's always still something, though, that I feel needs to be done. And then when that something needs to be done, it does almost always fall to the person that perhaps isn't.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we almost, like, I've really had to almost kind of change my expectations, right? I have, always have been, right? House needs to be pristine, right? Everything needs to be perfect. Pillows need to be plumped. Everything needs to be cleaned, and dog needs to be groomed, and, bathrooms need to be cleaned to within an inch of the tiles falling off, like all of that stuff, right? That's kind of where I was at. And again, actually, some things are okay. Like, the whole house does not need micro cleaning to, you've scrubbed so hard that the paint's going to come off the wall every single week, right? Yeah. And again, I had to start to change something, because actually what I'd realized was, when I was particularly coming out of my second burnout, as I said, my tolerance levels just really, really started to change. And maybe some of that was going into, kind of menopause at that time anyway. I mentioned the kind of, speaking about some of those symptoms coming. So maybe some of it was there. But I definitely started to think of things slightly differently. And actually, a lot of the stress that I was causing myself, or a lot of the drama, and I can still do it now, right? If I say Monday is bins, Tuesday is whatever, and it's like, if the bins haven't gone out by like 5 o'clock at night, then I'm like, well, somebody's going to forget the bins, right? This is and then like, well, no, mum, we're just going to do it before we go to bed.
Yeah.
So I think I've still got this kind of like, it must be done now, immediately, because this is what we're doing and this is where we're going with it. And actually, it's a bit more lax. And I just realized that some of the stress I was causing myself was because of my own expectations, or my own timeframes, or my own wanting everything to be absolutely perfect and absolutely spotless. And again, living with 4 boys, a dog, and a partner, right? My house is never going to look like a show home.
Yeah.
Me constantly wanting it to look like a show home is completely at odds with living with, 4 boys, a partner, and a dog, when we both run our own businesses, right? So the expectations had to shift slightly. It's never going to look like a show home. It's nice, it looks good, it's clean, it's tidy, but the kind of show home, everything needs to be perfect, everything needs to be in its place, everything needs to be lined up, I kind of had to get rid of, because the only person I was stressing out with that was me. And again, I do think social media does have a part to play in this, right? We see, the perfect mum, the perfect house, the perfect kitchen, the perfect exercise routine, the perfect garden, the perfect wardrobe, the perfect, like, I don't think that's helping a lot of us. And it's setting a lot of really unrealistic expectations for working women, who are exhausted, who do carry a lot of stress, who do want a nice home, but it doesn't have to look, show home standard when people are living in it. And I don't think social media is necessarily helping us from that. I think it's setting and even like Marie Kondo. And, we all used to love a bit of Marie, right? But again, like, even Marie Kondo, when she'd had kids, was like, do you know what? I've been setting some realistic expectations for mums all these years. And we were like, no kidding, right? Some of us have almost like got ourselves to burnout trying to Marie Kondo our houses. And as soon as she has kids, she's like, yeah, this is just impossible. We're like, could have told us that like 10 years ago.
That's brilliant. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because definitely in lockdown, I was the tidy house person. I had to lower my expectations. I can't do this. I can't cook 15 meals a day and still keep everything clean, and we're all still here. I think my husband's probably a little bit upset about that one, because I'm not sure that those, I certainly haven't upped them since. So, but that's fine. My house is, what do we like to call it, cozy?
Cozy. There we go.
Yeah. And I'm very aware of time, and I do want to very quickly touch on sort of the workplace, because obviously that's where this journey for you started. What do you feel like employers and leaders need to understand about burnout? I put and menopause, but but maybe burnout and menopause, because actually we sort of touched on it briefly, and I do feel so many things, when they're brought to sort of the forefront of conversation, become a box ticking exercise. And so I've gone into enough companies, as have you, and given talks, and then it's like, so what's your menopause policy? And it's like, when they get hot, open a window, they can take time off, and it's like, that's great. So you've got a policy of how are you supporting that woman, and what are your actions? What are you doing? And that's where I almost like to think sometimes my app will somehow, somewhere, make it into companies, because instead of buying Mind or Calm or whatever, there is something there that coaches and supports a woman. So that's my question. How do employers and leaders understand, and what do they need to do?
So I think there's a couple of things here. I want to kind of start with your kind of burnout and or menopause, right? And this true story, and I mentioned this in my last book. I was having a conversation with a CEO, and we were talking about burnout, and he was talking about his kind of rising numbers. It was affecting a number of his leaders. But when we started to speak about some of the stuff that needed to change within his organisation, he honestly sat back in his chair and tutted I was like, oh, so now we've got to do all this stuff around burnout, right? We're already doing the menopause stuff. And now you're telling me that we have to do burnout as well, right? It doesn't, like, just because you tick one box doesn't mean that everything else is going to work, right? At least if you've got, kind of equal workplace, at least 50% of your workforce are going to be experiencing menopause at some point, right? If you've got women, and they are at that stage of life, that's the point that we're at.
But also, just sorry to interrupt that, Kelly.
Yeah.
100%, because this is my thing. When people go, 51% of the population will go through menopause.
Yes.
It won't. It affects
Everybody.
partners.
Yes.
It's 100%.
Yeah, love that point. Yes. I will be correct on that. But yes, absolutely, because it does, right? It impacts us, it impacts our relationships, our work, everything. So yes, absolutely. There we go. Menopause impacts 100% of people. And if we get to that point of burnout, so does burnout.
Yeah.
But they're not the same thing. Burnout can be prevented. And actually what we need to be looking at, and this is what I talk about with all leaders in every single organisation and all of the coaches that I train and work with as well. Burnout, if we have a scale, right, at one end of this scale we have well-being, and at the other end of the scale we have burnout. What most organisations are doing through everything that they do is leading all of their people towards burnout and then sprinkling a bit of a well-being initiative on top, like a yoga class or a breathwork class or a meditation app, and saying, well, that's going to fix all of your problems. And it's not. Well-being and burnout are the outcome of everything that you do within your organisation. So you can either choose to create wellness and well-being in your organisations and create and support well-beings in the workplace, right? Fundamentally, the people that you employ, or you can keep doing everything that's leading everybody towards burnout. And I have this burnout equation, again, from kind of a decade of doing this stuff now, is that toxicity minus our sense of self equals burnout. So all of us could work in a toxic workplace, but if we still know who we are, if we're living and breathing and working in ways that's aligned to our values, we'll probably avoid burnout. Likewise, we could be in a non-toxic workplace, not know who we are, but we start to create maybe some toxic relationships outside of work. Maybe we start to create some toxic self-talk. And it's that own toxicity, that toxicity of ourselves, that can lead us to that point of burnout. So toxicity minus our sense of self equals burnout. And what lots of organisations do not do is they do not want to know who I am as an individual. They don't want to know really what my strengths are, what my morals, my values, my ethics, my drivers, my passions. We might ask that stuff at an interview. And then you employ me and we go, that's brilliant, Kelly, but these are our values, these are our behaviours, and these are the boxes that you now must tick throughout the whole of your workplace. And for the majority of us, right, whether we're we're born into families, we're in schools, colleges, universities, workplaces, very, very rarely, if at all, do we say, who are you? And how can we bring the best out of you? Because what we say is, here's this tick box of standards that you must live towards. And actually, if you're not ticking these boxes, you shouldn't be here, or you must modify and change your behaviour. So we're seeing lots of those things happen. But leaders need to understand well-being and burnout are the outcome of everything. So if you have toxic working hours, if you have toxic communication, if there's no clarity, no strategy, no direction, no communication, no support for things like menopause or anything else, if you're not putting your people first, if you're not creating people first workplaces, if you are discriminatory in any sense whatsoever, if you're not giving standards and training and support and listening, all of those things really are heading you one step closer to burnout. And just sprinkling a wellbeing initiative on top is not going to fix it. So we need to recognise that stuff. Burnout isn't just something that you wake up with one day. Burnout takes years to get to the point of actual burnout, and it can take years to recover from. So it's not just that there was a little bit too much stress in the organisation last week and now Kelly's at burnout. It's not that. It's really deep rooted, but it is systemic. And I think too many leaders still assume that burnout is an individual issue. Right, well, Kate, you just weren't resilient enough, so it's your fault that you've got to burnout. That's not it. Mm-hmm. If you've experienced burnout, it's because of those broken, toxic, systemic issues that have been going on behind the scenes that have then contributed to your burnout. But it's not because you're not resilient enough. It's not because you weren't engaged enough. It's not because you weren't working hard enough. You have got to that point, probably because you are engaged and passionate and driven and hardworking, but all of the systems and the ways of working underneath you were not supporting you to allow you to continue to do your job in the best way. And I think that needs to be the starting point. But leaders also need to recognise, burnout isn't just another, well, we're doing menopause, we're doing inclusion. It's not a thing. It's an outcome of everything. It's just part of what people will experience if you don't get the other stuff right.
Do you know what? I think that's a great place to finish.
There we go.
I love that like kind of summary, and I think you're totally right. When you were saying that, I was like, when I was thinking about people I know, and their situations. Just not one last question, but one last thing. If someone has listened to this and they're like, right, we need to get Kelly into our organisation, or I'm obviously assuming you go and you talk to organisations. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so if it's a social media platform, I'm most active on LinkedIn, and you'll find all sorts on there: resources, podcasts, blogs, everything. But if you want even more details, head to kellyswingler.com and you'll find everything there.
Great, and we will put those links as well in the side notes.
Thank you very much.
I think that this is, and I don't think this is just sort of the beginning of. This is very much, I think, just the beginning of something, because I think, as you pointed out, that well-being, mental wellness and mental well-being is still, I don't think, on a lot of people's radars, because we have grown up in such that society where it's pushed through, and some people just do see it. And great point that you made there, as a weakness, or you're not resilient enough, or you're not tough enough. And I think that's the narrative that really needs to change.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, well, it's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I know. And where do you? Well, I'll ask you when we finish where you live. We don't want people coming to stalk you, but we'll have to meet up in real life. I feel like we've got so much to more to cover, or maybe even do this again.
I'd love that.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.